Okie doke. All right, so I'll just start us off with a couple of items and then open it up to anyone who has anything specifically. But I thought because of all of the ice and everything, I did see, this isn't really solar related, but it's renewable energy related. I saw that our good friend Tucker Carlson on Fox News is now saying that wind is obviously not good because they had to shut down some of the wind turbines in Texas because of ice during this latest ice storm. So therefore, renewable energy is a joke and could not possibly be the answer to anything. And so I first off wanted to double check to see if in fact they had shut down any wind turbines, because that's always something to verify when you watch or read anything from Fox News. And it did turn out that in fact they did take about 50% of them offline for a brief period of time, which essentially led to a 10% reduction in energy capacity in Texas. Now, the reason for the outages had nothing to do with that. It was because the ice was destroying power lines, and that's why there were outages. But it's a legitimate issue as far as ice on the wind turbines. And in some of my research, I found that if the wind turbine blades do get encrusted with ice, what it does is it throws off the balance of the blade and also slows them down. So typically their internal controls will be designed to shut down, which is what happened in Texas. But it begs the question, since wind turbines are everywhere and in some pretty inhospitable locations like the North Sea, clearly ice is not a brand new thing to the wind turbine industry. And as it turns out, it's not. It's just that they didn't install any ice mitigating procedures in Texas because there's not a whole lot of ice in Texas. So typically what they'll do is newer systems, they do have heated blades, which is kind of interesting. They take some of the internal energy and heat the blades so that no ice forms on them. There are also ice resistant surfaces that can be put either sprayed on or built into the wind turbine. And then in situations where it's warranted, they have drones that they can send up that spray de-icing material onto the wind turbine. You know, it's sort of similar to how you would de-ice an airplane. So all of these things, kerosene, probably a nice renewable energy thing. And then you just set it on fire and that takes care of the ice. Right?
No, I think that's what they do with airplane wings. They de-ice it with kerosene.
Yeah, but they don't set it on fire, hopefully.
No.
So, anyway, so those are the issues. And so ice is in fact a factor. And in Texas, it was a factor because an ice storm like this happens once every, 10 years or something. So, but you may hear a little bit about it. I just thought it was an interesting thing, interesting enough to bring up.
Add, Jay, a lot of people who will retort against the propaganda about wind are quick to point out that all the natural gas failed too, so we should probably not rely on that either.
Yeah.
Since
well,
Texas
and I did
largely natural gas. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. But I did also see a thing that occurs in ice storms as well with coal power plants is they stack all of the coal outside and the coal stacks freeze up and they can't actually access the coal to burn in their power plants when they're frozen up with ice. So so that's an issue as well. So anyway, the reality is that severe weather causes disruptions regardless of the technology. And as Eugene was just mentioning, having to go up and clear snow off of the solar panels is another issue with solar that we deal with. Although I have found that in the wintertime, whether I clear the snow or not, I seem not to get very much sunlight. So so that's a less of an issue. But Anyway, the other thing I thought I would bring up is, since I've been focused on this, I wanted to just sort of briefly go over some of the incentives that are out there in the marketplace. And the reason I'm bringing this up is I was just contracted to do some evaluations for the USDA, and they have their REAP program, which is for rural businesses. And so one of the programs that are out there is agricultural businesses or businesses located in rural communities. And I think they define rural community as anything less than 50,000 people. So most of southeastern Ohio qualifies. They can receive a 25% grant for the installation of solar. And it is a competitive bid thing. There's a limited number of funds, but usually they have enough to cover most things. So what they're doing is asking, what I'm going to be doing is some initial assessments. So if you know of any rural businesses in Ohio that want to have an initial assessment, at no charge, just go out, take a look at their facility and give them a real broad brush estimate of what it's going to cost them to put solar without somebody trying to sell them a solar system. And then the USDA will say, okay, well, we'll make funding available if you pursue this. So, but there's that 25% incentive. There's the federal tax, the income tax credit, which is still at 26%. So you remember we discussed, or if you were on the call, we discussed that in December, the ITC, the investment tax credit, was extended for 2 years at 26%. It was scheduled to go down, but during the COVID relief bill, they extended that. And apparently there were a lot of other energy incentives and energy legislation that were folded into that bill. Things that were languishing in the Senate. So I did hear an interesting podcast about that. Things like banning of certain chemicals that are used in air conditioning units, which is supposed to have a huge effect on greenhouse gas. I guess it was, Murkowski, the senator from Alaska, who is the chair of that committee. And they had come up with a whole bunch of bipartisan proposals, but Mitch McConnell had refused to allow any of them to come to a vote. So she was able to get that pulled into the reconciliation bill around COVID relief. So there are some good incentives that went through during that. Anyway, so the 26% tax credit is still good for another 2 years. 2021, 2022, then we'll see what happens. I suspect it'll be extended, but we don't know that for sure. It could then go down to 22% in 2023, and then 10% after that for commercial. But at least for the next 2 years, we're at 26%. So what that basically means is whatever your out-of-pocket costs were, if you just spent, I don't know what, $10,000 on a PV system, including installation, then you'd be able to take a tax credit of $2,600 on your federal income tax. So it's not a tax deduction, it's a tax credit. So that's money off what you would have been paying. So that's a big deal. And then if you're selling to businesses, the accelerated depreciation can be a big deal. And this is something you don't often find with individuals, and I'll have to do a little more research. Bob, you might know if this can be applied to individuals. But the accelerated depreciation basically says, instead of depreciating it over a period of time, if you were to think straight line depreciation, you'd say, this thing's going to last for 20 years, so I can take 1/20 of it as a tax deduction every year for the next 20 years. That would be straight line depreciation. but the federal accelerated depreciation says you can take the entire amount as a deduction in the first year. So
I thought it was 5 years.
no, it's 5 years, but the new law said you can take 100% in the first year.
That's for any property, Jay. I apologize for jumping in the middle, but
sure.
Yeah, and I think that's going to expire in a year or two, but you're right. It's for any property, not just solar property.
Okay. So it extends to a lot of different things, not just solar.
It's all PP&E. Yeah. So if you do it, I don't know what you're saying, but you get the deduction of, let's say it's 30%, or the credit for 30%. You only have to reduce your depreciation by 15%.
Yeah.
You get 80. You can deduct 85% of it.
Yeah. So that's what I was just going to mention. Because it's the IRS, they don't want to make it super simple. So because you're getting a 26% federal tax credit right now, you'd have to remove half of that, 13%, off of your basis. So if your basis was $10,000, just to make the numbers easy, you would then get a $2,600 tax credit from your federal taxes, but then your accelerated depreciation would be off a basis of $8,700 instead of $10,000. So you could deduct $8,700 as a deduction, not a credit. Okay, so regardless of whatever your tax rate is, then that would determine how much that is worth to you. Now with the state taxes, the accelerated depreciation is still over a 5-year period, at least for Ohio.
It depends on your state.
Yeah. And in Ohio, you can take, I think it's 20% the first year. So you can make that deduction. So one of the examples I was looking at as sort of part of this REAP program was we were looking at pricing out a 15 kW system, and that 15 kW system at a $2.50 a watt installation cost ended up being, if my numbers are right, I think that comes in at $37,500. But after you've taken the federal tax credit, the accelerated depreciation, assuming they're paying a corporate tax rate, the REAP grant of 25% for agricultural and their state, and then we factored in if they took the SRECs in the state of Ohio, which are currently selling at $11 per rec. So that would have generated over a 5-year period, $1,000. Anyway, the cost of the system ended up being like $7,700. So the incentives were pretty significant. It actually brought the payback period time down to 2.5 years, which was pretty astounding on a system like that. Yeah, hey, Bob.
A little clarification. So I hear you saying that industrial can't take the 26%.
Industrial can, yeah. I mean, yeah.
What do you mean corporate or like business?
Yeah, I'm going to be selling to corporations, small corporations.
Yeah.
Owners of corporate properties and stuff like that. And they can take the 26%.
Yeah, as long as they're for profit. You know, if it's a nonprofit corporation, then of course they don't pay taxes, so it doesn't have value to them, which is oftentimes why you would set it up under a lease agreement with a nonprofit, because then you'd have an investor who can take that tax credit and get the accelerated depreciation. The nonprofit, those things aren't something that apply to them. So they get the advantage of paying a lower, or basically having no upfront costs, because they're entering into a lease agreement.
So are we talking about profits that we keep on the books in the freezer, or the ones that we declare to the IRS?
Yeah, we know you live in Chicago, so it's two different accounting systems up there. So anyway, yeah, Now, as far as I know, Don, you mentioned, does the accelerated depreciation apply to individuals as well as corporations? I would assume it does.
It applies. Remember, for individuals, just for your house, if you're not in a business, you don't get any depreciation for anything. If you're in a business, you know, if Bob, your customers are an S corp, that means they're paying it on their individual returns, but they can take the depreciation just like a corporation would, or an LLC or something, as long as it's a for-profit business, as you were saying, Jay.
Okay. All right.
I'm an S corp.
Yeah. And it seemed to me there was another factor, at least when, and this is something I haven't looked at, so I may be wrong. Isn't there a fair amount that you can just take as a deduction without having to even worry about accelerated depreciation for improvements on your business, like up to a certain number limit?
It's a schedule so that, let's say you just buy a tractor and you're a farmer. If it's 5-year property, you really depreciate over 6 years because you get a half year in the beginning, half year at the end, and then each of the others is a standard year. It's not straight line. It's like an accelerated depreciation. But right. So yeah, if the 100% deducted, if the 100% expensing goes out, when it expires, then you're going to go back to, I think most solar properties are 3 or 5 year property.
Yeah, I just thought that they had raised something to say, okay, for capital goods like that, you could just simply deduct up to $10,000 or something, you know, just expensive.
There is something like that for this very small, that phases out, but it's for a very small thing. It's a, oh God, what's the number? I forget the number, but you're right. The number used to be 5,000. It's probably 10,000 now. It's small companies can deduct the first, you know, expense just under normal law, the first 5 or 10,000 of equipment they buy.
Yeah. And
mainly for people, it's designed for like plumbers who buy, you know, a drill or a saw or something like that, stuff that they're not going to want to track and expense, and it's not too expensive.
I should also point out, since we're talking about taxes and stuff, if you're an LLC, self-employment, none of this applies to your self-employment tax, you know, which is basically your Social Security. That doesn't, so all your tax credits and things like that do not apply to that self-employment tax.
Your credits won't, but your depreciation should.
I guess that would reduce the basis or reduce your taxable income. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Okay. All right. Okay, so those were some of the issues I wanted to bring up. Did anybody have an issue they want to bring up for the good of the cause here?
Yeah, I'd like to discuss something. I have a neighbor that complained to the city of Columbus that my roof is all covered with solar panels and it goes against the aesthetic of Clintonville. And so I saw a city staff person come out in their car and take pictures of my roof, you know, and then I got a call from one of the building code administrators down, you know, from the city. And he looked up my permit that was originally taken out in 2013 from the initial 2 kilowatt system that was installed by Appalachian Renewable Power. And it turns out they see the application being initiated back then, but it was never completed because the city asked Appalachian Renewable for more information and they never responded. So I never had a valid construction permit from 2013. So I don't know, has anyone dealt with, so I'm gonna have to do the permit myself because I've by a factor of 6, increased the capacity to 12 kilowatts from 2 kilowatts. So has anyone dealt with this with the city as far as the permitting goes? I looked at the website and there's a general document, but it's not specific at all. It just tells you what to build your system. It gives you some guidelines for adhering to code, but it doesn't specifically describe the code, you know?
Is Clintonville considered part of Columbus?
It is.
Yeah. I know I went through, I wasn't directly involved, but I was indirectly involved with one in Columbus. And their code thing was a bit of a nightmare, in that they required actually two different electrical inspections, one for the service panel and then one for the array itself, because we had to upgrade the service panel as part of installing the array. So they decided those were two different projects, even though one was requiring the other. And they had a real wonky kind of process where you paid them a $200 fee, but then you had to hire an independent inspector to come out and do the inspection, and you had to pay him as well, because the city didn't have any inspectors, but they told you who you could use. And then the inspector didn't have any experience in solar, so I had to do all of the work for them and draw up the one-line drawings and everything. So the inspector basically came out and said, yeah, that looks like a one-line drawing, stamped it, and charged $250. And then the city charged $200. And it was the dumbest thing, because it ended up, it was a $10,000 project, but we had $1,000 in fees from the city for this silly little project. And there was zero value added, in their process. Pardon?
Just be thankful it wasn't in Chicago.
Yeah, Chicago is a lot worse, right? Yeah.
Really? A $5,000 fee.
It all depends on who you know.
Yeah.
But I have to tell you that my experience has been basically that I have to get approval from the city that I'm putting it into before Edison will even consider you for net zero operations at all.
Yeah.
And second is, as you saw, Jay, I gave you the drawings, 13 pages of drawings that was made out of this California outfit that I went to. And they asked me all of these questions, and then they came up with a pretty good set of drawings, which, by the way, you can inspect too. It has the schematics, it has the dimensions for the mechanical installations, and you have it. You can hand it to a person who can read drawings, and they can inspect it to that,
Yeah, I should say, Eugene, if you're not familiar with any of the online tools, it sounds like it's a big deal, but I know, Bob, you were using the Aurora system, right? The Aurora.
But for the drawings, not for that. That was a different company.
Oh, okay.
That specializes. I'll tell you, California has done such a great job of trailblazing all of this stuff that everything's out of California, and they're in competition now on do my drawings. I had to get a stamp from a certified engineer for the construction, and I had to send them photographs and drawings and all sorts of stuff, and then I had to pay for the stamp and stuff like that. So, and
what did that end up costing you for those permit-ready drawings?
Well, the regular drawings was $275, and the mechanical add-on was another $250.
So a little over $500.
Yeah, and with the city that I dealt with, I had to have liability insurance, which was $3,000, which was $2 million, $1 million, $2 million, and then my registration costs, I had to have a $25,000 bond, which was $250.
Your liability policy, though, was for your business, not for the project?
No, it extended out to the project.
Well, I know, but I can, for instance, on my homeowners, I can get liability on the install itself, which only added just a few dollars a year to my homeowner's policy.
Well, when you start putting people on the roof and covering their liability on the roof, the prices go right through the ceiling.
Right, I know. So your business, that liability should carry over to other projects, though, is what I'm saying, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh yeah, to all other projects, right? So if somebody falls off the roof and damages something as they fall off, then that covers the damage that they do.
Yeah.
Including themselves?
Yeah, let's hope.
Them too.
Yeah. Now, Eugene, there is a tool if you're interested in looking at it, and I guess this applies to everybody, similar to Aurora, but not quite as packed with features. It's called PV Sketch, and PV Sketch is a design software program, and it's free. You can use it up to doing 5 projects a month. And it's kind of a slick little system if you're not doing this as a livelihood, where many of those systems like Aurora, what do they charge? Like $150 a month or something like that for subscription?
Like $265 a month.
$265. Yeah. So obviously you don't want to invest in something like that if you're only doing one or two projects.
I use the PV Sketch, but to use it is very encumbrment. I mean, it is a very difficult system. But I have to tell you that after an hour trying to get the shading, and that's the hard part on that, and drawing the drawings so that the shading is accurate, I call them up, and they're there to help you out 100%.
Well, that's good.
I was impressed with that.
And then I know that they've got a thing, like if you want a more detailed proposal, and it's really a proposal software, they do charge you like $3. You know, you just say, okay, I want this proposal. But then they also have a feature where you can pay them, and I don't know what the fee is, and they will produce permit-ready drawings for that project. So that might be an option for you to go in, and they use Google Earth. You simply get an image of your home. You can outline where the panels are. You can specify what equipment is there. And then you can just ask them to generate some drawings based on that. Because I think your city is going to ask for these permit-ready drawings. And
one line drawings, diagram.
Yeah, and that's what they'll generate.
I know how to do that. I've done it with just Corel Draw, a vector drawing program, and they accepted that. I wasn't aware. When I upgraded the system, I submitted that to AEP Electric for them to approve it. I wasn't aware that the city needed to know about it too for the upgrade.
Okay. And I don't know if they've got an ordinance, because Clintonville is a little unique in that there is a very active solar group there in Clintonville. I think, aren't you familiar with that, with Matt Crawford and those guys?
Oh, sure. They kind of stopped activity, but of course there's United Solar, I guess it's called. Are you familiar with them?
Yeah, that's more of a co-op kind of thing where you go together and they just simply do bulk purchasing. But what I was wondering is if they've got an ordinance, a solar ordinance for Clintonville. Oftentimes, it seemed to me in Columbus, the only issue I remember is solar couldn't be installed on the front of your house.
Right.
I think it had to be on the back, so that it wasn't visible from the street. And that's just something that sticks in my mind.
I'm using roof tile panels in the front, on the front, and you can't really notice them. So I'm just going to leave them there. That's part of the system.
But is your neighbor complaining about solar panels that are in the back of your house?
Yeah, but I think she's complaining because I have a hip roof. Triangular faces of the roof.
Gotcha.
I cantilever a lot of the panels. They're sticking off beyond the outline of the roof. So I don't know if the city's going to complain about that. I have steel. What's it called? Strut braces.
Yeah.
That hold it up when they're cantilevered.
Well, there is a. Pardon, Don?
I was going to say, don't you have to have a foot or 3 feet around the edges?
Yeah, there is a setback requirement from the International Fire Code. Now, cities are often not familiar, or inspectors are not familiar with the fire code. They're familiar with the electrical code. But with a hip roof, what you would find is basically there's got to be a 3-foot pathway. Now that can straddle the hip. So it'd be 1.5 feet on each side of that. That has to be clear distance for firefighters to be able to walk up there on the roof. So if it's overrunning the roof pitch, it's not only aesthetically bad, but it's also a violation of the International Fire Code. Yeah, Bob?
Yes. I have pulled up in front of me the engineering drawing certificate, so you can see it if you want to show it.
Okay, yeah, just share it real quick.
Sure. All right, so I gotta go to screen share.
While he's doing that, Eugene, what were you gonna say?
Oh, is the, for the fire access, I understand you need a perimeter. Let's say I had a regular roof, you need a perimeter around the edge of the roof, where the gutters are.
Yeah.
And what's that? Is that 3 feet, or is that 1.5 feet, or what?
Well, if you're talking about the sides, usually you're thinking about like a normal roof, that's got 2 planes on it.
Right.
On the sides, you would have 3 feet on each side, 16 inches on the bottom. That there is no setback requirement from the International Fire Code on that, on the eave. But for wind loading and the like, it's good to have it set back about 16 inches. Otherwise, the wind can catch it. But that's not a code issue. The assumption is they can just come up with a ladder. But on the sides, it's got to be, is this looking like your roof, a hip roof like that?
Well, yeah, let's see. Yeah, except that the 2 large planes there are all the hips, all the planes are the same size.
Oh, okay, I got you. So if we assume like that, basically what you're seeing there is the eaves. So scroll it back up just a bit, leave it there, yeah. So underneath that, where the arrow is,
yeah,
you can keep right up to the edge there if you need to, but it's better if you can set it back about 16 inches because the wind can catch it and it causes additional stress on the roof. But on the sides, you'll see the line there.
Point to the sides. Point to the sides.
Bring your arrow over there, that side, but go to the line right between them, right in there. Yeah, there should be 1.5 feet on each side of that as a clear pathway. And there should be 1.5 feet at the top that is a clear pathway on both ends.
I find a wide variety and variance on fire codes on which township you're in.
Yeah, and almost nobody adheres to them.
And this one has no requirements here. I've talked to the fire chief and to the inspectors, they have nothing.
Yeah, what you'd need to find out, Eugene, is has the city of Columbus adopted the 2012 International Fire Code? If they have, that's what we're referencing. Now, you may draw attention to yourself, when you go in asking that.
Yeah.
Check on the internet.
I've done that.
Now, if you scroll back up to that diagram there, Bob, what he's got there is normally going to be accepted, even though technically those 2 panels are not, where the corners of the panels are, you don't have a 3 foot, but that's enough to just sort of step over.
Yeah.
And there is access, because what they're wanting to be able to do is take a chainsaw and cut a hole through there to vent the roof if the house is on fire. So that's basically you need not only a walkway area, but an access so that you can cut holes into the roof for venting.
Even though
I have friends who are firefighters and they will not go up to this thing. They are so scared of getting electrocuted with this thing, even though they shut off the power. They know if the sun is out, it's still producing something. They don't understand microinverters in any way whatsoever. They may go up into this area here, but they won't even start to.
Yeah.
Well,
here. Another factor, since we're on here, is your wiring. Once you penetrate the roof, the wiring is supposed to go down 10 inches directly below where you penetrated under the array itself, and then go horizontally. And normally it's best if you can apply it to the underside of a rafter, you know, so that if a chainsaw cuts through the roof, it's not going to catch that conduit and cut through the wire itself. So you're going, you go down, straight down 10 inches and then across.
I go on the outside of the house. I run conduit on the outside.
Okay, so you have it exposed on the roof a little bit, which is fine.
Yeah.
But you got to size the wire appropriately for the additional heat. But then you go down the side of the house, and as long as it's visible, the assumption is those guys can deal with it.
Yeah.
But it's when it's hidden below the rafters, you don't want to like apply the conduit to the underside of your decking. You know, it might be the easiest way to do it inside your attic, but it's now hidden from the firefighter. So you want to come straight down at least 10 inches.
Well, the way I did this all wrong then, because what I did is I put a 1900 box. So I came out right into the center of a 1900 box that's connected to the rafter, and then came off of that 1900 box.
Well, that's fine as long as that 1900 where you're bringing your conduit along is more than 10 inches away from the deck of the roof. Because obviously you got to come straight down somewhere. So you'd come down at a 90-degree angle to the roof and then go somewhere else, 10 inches away from the deck.
Well, coming down is 8 inches to the bottom of the rafters.
Yeah, if you're putting it on the bottom of the rafter, you're probably still going to be safe. But it'd be better if you were to attach a 2x4 or something and just extend it a little bit.
I love these meetings. I'm always learning something.
Right. Yep. And if you're using MC cable, which is normal inside your building, you know, it's flexible enough. You can just, you know, twist it and turn it. You don't have to be using EMT. You know, gives you that ability to kind of flex to wherever you need to be and just put some staples.
In Chicago, the code is very clear. I got to use EMT inside. Yeah. I'm allowed 3 feet maximum for any type of flexible.
Yeah, and I know Chicago, Cook County is different than most of the rest of the world. And that was because of the pipe fitters union. They went in and required it for everything, you know. So.
I thought Chicago said it was whatever Benjamin Franklin told them.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, no, Chicago is a different universe as far as it's funny the difference. Pardon?
Chicago is not that bad, believe it or not.
Yeah.
Out here we have this very rich suburb called Mount Prospect, and they pay their employees very, very well. And they earn their keep, and they get these people who know everything, not about solar, but everything about everything. And they write these codes, and it's just, that's harder than Chicago.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the challenges that we have going forward is as a industry is to try and propagate common sense solar codes and ordinances around the country. And that's one of the things when I was at Green Energy Ohio, I was trying on the board, I was trying to get them to basically get a city ordinance template and then go from city to city, basically saying, here's what we recommend. How about if you just adopt these guidelines, to be proactive to make sure that it didn't cause a problem. But never did it. So as a result, we're going to be putting out fires, around the city. It could be worse. I know we have a friend in France, and he was cited. His neighbors came after him. And it turned out in France, if the church objects, then, it's a done deal. Basically, they have a law saying that you cannot visually see solar panels from the church.
Any church or just a Catholic church?
Well, there's no other church apparently, because God hates solar. So he's dealing with that issue. But
Jay,
yeah.
I was gonna say, I have a suggestion for you for your next podcast with you and Annie. The big news that I hear, and I hear everybody talking about it all day long now, is in Texas, they're blaming all the power outages on renewable energy.
Yeah,
we talked about that before I got in or not, but
yeah, we talked about that just at the outset, and it was around wind turbines and stuff. Yeah, I think that's an interesting issue, and of course it has a kernel of truth, but
you're saying Trump was right when the wind stops blowing and the sun stops shining, that the renewables aren't usable? I wouldn't even say that's true, because there is storage, so for resiliency, there has to be storage with renewables. But, they always say the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine. My response is, yes, it does somewhere, so, and I just did some additional research on long distance transportation of energy. And basically you're only losing about 10% per 1,000 miles. So, so if the wind is blowing in Iowa, you can get power from those wind turbines to New York City and only lose 10% of it. And you'll lose an additional 10% from the substation to the outlet. So really, long distance distribution is not that big of a deal. The issue in Texas, as I mentioned, was the ice on the wind turbines. And it's because they weren't designed to deal with ice, because it's Texas. But the real issue had to do with ice on distribution lines, which caused the outages. So it had nothing to do with renewable energy. And in fact, wind generally works better in the winter because there are more wind events, and solar works better when it's cold. So, renewables are fairly resilient if they're designed for the environmental issues that come to affect them. So that's true with everything,
Oh, Jay, I think you're confusing the issues with facts. You shouldn't.
Yeah. Well, this was Fox News, so we don't have to worry about facts. So
it wasn't just Fox News.
Yeah.
This is the reason they don't want to use fly airplanes anymore either.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's true too. And cars slide on ice, therefore they're no good. Well, Bill, you're down in Texas. What's the real scoop?
Well, you can see that I'm bundled up because we've been without power for more than 24 hours. No heat but I just wanted to add to the comment on the gentleman that has had problems with the city. This NERDL list, this list of panels that have been certified by UL or not, that may be a factor depending upon the certifications on the panels and the equipment that you've used. And I know I run into panels all the time that have a CE rating but not a UL or a TUV rating. And I hope. So that brings up another issue. What if something in the code was adopted after you did the installations? For example, rapid shutdown. Is that grandfathered in? That's my question.
Yes, it is grandfathered in unless you do substantial adjustments to your array. So Eugene, for instance, would have been covered under grandfathering, except he added more panels. So now it becomes essentially a new installation. So it really depends on if you've made modifications that they consider quote unquote substantial. You know, if you go up and fix something, replace a microinverter because it fried out, that's not a substantial change. But if you increase the size of your array by a factor of 6, then I'm afraid, Eugene, you have created a new solar array. So, you know,
my whole thing for a tax assessment, tax reassessment, right?
Yeah, you might be, unless like in our region, we just simply don't tell them about anything. So, yeah.
They don't want to go up on the roof anyway. Nobody goes up on the roof.
Yeah, well, they kind of, it depends. I mean, you see the differences in jurisdictions, of course, like Bob's mentioned Chicago. Eugene, you live in Clintonville, which I find neighbors to be difficult on almost every level. So I live out in the middle of nowhere, which is good, unless you actually have to drive on the roads, which can be somewhat problematic.
Is your electric car going to handle that, Jay?
Yeah, I know. Our electric car is under 2 feet of snow right now, but our 4-wheel drive pickup truck got me right out. So that gas guzzler.
No gas guzzler did it.
That's right. So, yeah,
so
Jay.
The question I think fits in here. We have 19 panels from one place and 13 more panels from somewhere else on our roof. And I'm sure the contract language said that they would take care of permitting and such things, but were something to be determined not to be on the up and up with my city of Worcester, is there a statute of limitations on how soon a challenge to zoning or installation would have to come up?
I'm not aware. I'm sure there is. But that would be local in nature, I would assume. You just might want to check anonymously.
That's all local, but most places, like tax returns, if you never filed them, they always run from the time you filed them. So if you never file them, the statute never runs. There has to be a, you know,
I doubt that we don't have, we did not do independent legal assessment of the completeness of what our contractors did. And one was done and one was somebody sort of local here. And I think we're just trusting ignoramus or something.
Yeah, my guess is you're probably going to be just fine unless you get into a situation like Eugene where you got a neighbor who's pressing the issue. We had a guy, Bob, what was the guy's name up there in Illinois who got into a homeowners association? I forget his first name now. He was on the
John G.
Yeah, John. Where because of local politics with the homeowners association, Illinois basically adopted a law saying homeowners associations cannot stop you from putting panels on a roof, you know, because some of them were coming out and just flat out banning solar on your rooftop. And they came up with the law saying you can't do that. But John's was a ground mounted system. So his homeowners association came out and said, you can't do it because we've decided to ban them. And it was mostly because he had been on the board and the current president didn't like him and there was some politics there and personality conflicts. So this guy was just flexing his Myrtle the Turtle role, you know, in the homeowners association. But there was part of that statute that said, apparently there was a time delay. If you didn't file a formal objection within a 90-day period, then your ability to do so was gone, essentially. So the homeowners association never filed the proper paperwork. And by the time they got around to any kind of adjudication, John was able to just go in and say, hey, the 90-day period's over. You don't have any standing in this case. And that solved the whole problem. but that was just simply because of their own neglect of their own rules. But so Eugene, I guess we're saying probably, but you'll have to check.
Yeah, but Jay, regarding the UL certification, I know that some of my panels do not have that certification, but for those panels, 2 of my 3 strings of panels are wired low voltage, straight off the panel through conduit to the basement. And my microinverters are in the basement. So there's no high voltage on the roof with these non-UL panels. Would that make any difference whether they're UL certified or not?
You know, I don't know. Again, that's going to be an issue for your locals. UL certification is a manufacturer quality, certification that deals with some of the factors about how they're manufactured. I always recommend to our student, never buy any panel that's not UL 1703 certified, because you don't know what kind of quality you're getting. But that usually is not a performance issue as far as the code is concerned. Now, I know, I think it was Bill maybe mentioned about the CE certification or mark. That's a European mark. That doesn't carry as much weight because that is a self-assessment. So the manufacturer themselves basically say, oh, yeah, we comply, no problem. And there is no independent third party that's verifying that. So often people will not accept that. But UL, ETL, those kind of marks are good, and any reputable dealer should be dealing only in UL certified panels. Now, the one certification that usually comes into play for certain is the UL 1741 for inverters. And your utility will almost always mandate in their interconnection agreement that you have a UL 1741 certified inverter. And that's because it carries in the whole anti-islanding issues and grid, getting the grid, matching the grid exactly. So that's a real issue for the utility. And in some jurisdictions, they require it to be UL 1741 SA, which is the supplemental, which brings in smart inverters. And smart inverters get into some power quality management issues. So for instance, the microinverter, the whole I series, the i7s, the i6s, those are the smart inverters. So in some jurisdictions, you've got to use those. All new inverters are going to be certified to the SA standard, but some of the older inverters, like the microinverters with like the M250s or the M215 microinverters from M-Phase, those are not SA certified. So that can be played to your advantage because, for instance, our utility doesn't care about smart inverters because they don't have any smarts in their system. So I was able to install some old N-Phase 215s, the M215s, and I was able to buy those for $29 a piece because they were not able to be accessed in many jurisdictions. So you can get some good deals if your utility doesn't require it. And they work just fine. It's just that they don't do power quality management.
Yeah, but I like to give a little bit of advice. I owned my own business, Regency Electronics, for 27 years. And I can tell you that one of the first lessons I learned is that you can have all the laws in the world, but if you don't enforce it, it doesn't exist.
Yeah,
literally.
Well.
And enforcement is usually cost money. And Augie Fabella taught me when he stiffed me for $55,000 on an invoice that it would cost me $100,000 or $125,000 to get it back. And he knew that. So I couldn't afford it. So the other side is you can have all of these regulations, but you have the people who really understand it and have gone through Jay's class. That's another point. So how do they know what to charge you with when they don't know what to charge you with?
Yeah.
and then it costs money to do the charging and stuff like that. So sometimes it's better to say nothing and see what comes at you, if ever.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, Eugene's in a situation where his neighbor, for whatever reason, has decided to make an issue. My guess is if you talk to your neighbor and maybe if it's possible to move those panels to make them look a little more aesthetically pleasing, the whole problem may go away. But
well, I think now that the city's alerted, I've got to do the building permit thing anyway.
Yeah. Hey, I think
Bob,
you're probably in for some grief.
Yeah. Bob, would you mind emailing me that one-line diagram you were showing us?
What's your email?
Eugene at WGRN as in Nancy.org.
While you're doing that, it's funny because you're talking about silly regulations. At our business, Blue Rock Station, when we used to have people come, occasionally we would serve some lunches, and we had somebody file a complaint with the county health department that we did not have a commercial kitchen, and therefore were in violation, and we were going to be in trouble because we served lunches to small groups without a commercial kitchen. So we looked into the laws, and it turned out that we weren't required to have a commercial kitchen because we don't have the volume to require a commercial kitchen. But the law said we were in violation of the law that did not apply to us unless we put a sign up saying that the law did not apply to us. Now, where's the logic with that? So we put up a little sign in our building saying we are not required to have a commercial kitchen. And I kept saying, so it doesn't apply to us, but we can be in trouble for a law that doesn't apply to us if we don't tell people that the law doesn't apply to us. It's like, does that mean
your patient? That means your customers implicitly gave you informed consent to serve food that might be, inorganic or something because.
Yeah, I don't know. It's like you could be charged with murder if you don't murder somebody, if you don't tell people that you didn't murder somebody.
Exactly.
So the biggest thing I saw about Trump is how every day the media would just amplify Trump every day. But the biggest thing is if you cut and do nothing and don't report it, then it just goes away. So even though you've been reported on it and stuff like that, I have to tell you, there's a high power in doing nothing and becoming a lead weight on the whole thing. And a lot of people just go away, including neighbors.
Yeah, I think, Eugene, that's probably some good advice, is comply with what you have to comply with.
Yeah.
But don't make it easy on them, because bureaucrats are inherently lazy. And oftentimes they'll just move it from the pending file to the done pile because they want it off their desk.
Right.
If you just kind of, do the minimum. And
but if you keep calling them and talk to the neighbors and stuff like that and keep that thing going, you're keeping it alive.
Right.
I've had a building permit outstanding since 1999, and the guy who was at the permit place told me I had to do a certain thing and do something with my title. I told him that was not legal, but I might do it someday. So he said, well, we'll leave it outstanding until you do it. That was 22 years ago.
Yeah.
They've never called back since.
Well, we had a situation, I won't go into the details, but we were in court, and this was, about that 20, 30 years ago. And the judge, told us we had to follow through and do such a thing. And then after we were leaving, I asked our attorney, I said, geez, how am I going to comply with this order from the judge? And the attorney says, listen, this guy hears 30 cases every day. He will not remember what he told you to do, after lunch. So ignore it. And I was like, okay, I'll do that. And 30 years later.
I've had that where the court has issued a judgment to me saying I have to do something. just because you have a judgment doesn't necessarily mean you have to do it.
Yeah.
There's some fine lines in there, but again, they can garnish my wages, they can go into my checking accounts, and that takes a lot of lawyer time and stuff like that. So yep. I'm very good at doing nothing.
I had a judgment that I got against someone else, and the judge, because it was such an egregious case, ordered the guy to pay double what the actual was. And I never saw a penny of it. I mean, you know, because what, am I going to go back to court every single time because the guy doesn't follow through, you know, with his payment, and the court system never did anything, and, you know, and that was already deemed to be an egregious situation on his part, and they never did anything. So, well, all right, well.
I want you to know I'm very good at doing nothing.
we're all becoming experts at it. Yeah, Jay.
When we put in our geothermal, one of our neighbors complained about that we didn't have a permit for a well. And the city came out and said, "What are you doing?" And they said, "Oh, no, you're just digging a hole in the ground." And fortunately, our immediate next door neighbors are our friends and support sustainable energy, because one of the wells did hit water and spewed clay all over their yard on the path to the creek back, because it didn't go through our yard, it went through theirs. But the people across the creek didn't like something, didn't like our campaign signs, probably sort of like your llama.
Yeah.
But the city was okay with us.
Yeah, we all get those. That's why, you know, good fences make good neighbors kind of thing. You know, we put up a fence between our property in Florida and our next door neighbor, who was the neighbor from hell. And he called the code people because he said our fence was in violation of whatever rule he decided it was in violation. And the code guy came out and talked to us, and we're like, "Yo, what's the problem?" He goes, "There's no problem with your fence." But he went over and cited our neighbor for like 10 code violations. So I thought, all right, well, that's good karma. You know? So anyway, okay, well, we'll call this one and see everybody next Tuesday, and try and stay warm. And William, get your energy turned back on. If you had a DC coupled system, you'd have power right now. All right.
Thanks,
see you guys
Jay.
later.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.